Somewhere on the Eastern Front, Ukraine, 2024, a Russian T-72 is burning in a field. The vehicle that killed it is already gone. It fired, moved, and disappeared before the T-72's crew had time to identify the threat. The engagement lasted seconds. The vehicle that opened fire was not a tank. It did not have tracks. It had 8 wheels and a top speed of 120 kilometers per hour. And by the time the Russian armored column tried to locate it, it was 2 kilometers away and accelerating. Russian military doctrine had no prepared response to this. The doctrine had been written for a different kind of war, against a different kind of threat. It had been written before a small country under the most comprehensive arms embargo in history proved that a wheeled vehicle with the right gun and the right electronics could outmaneuver and outrange any tracked armored vehicle that tried to catch it. South Africa built that proof in 1990. The vehicle was called the Rooikat. In Afrikaans, the word means lynx. The animal is fast, precise, and gone before the larger predator can react. The vehicle was named correctly, and 30 years after it entered service, the debate it settled is still killing Russian tanks. To understand why South Africa built the Rooikat, you need to understand what the South African Defense Force had learned from a decade of fighting in Angola. The border war had not been the war that Soviet doctrine or American doctrine or anyone else's doctrine had predicted. It had been a war fought over vast distances on roads and tracks across terrain where the ability to move fast over long distances under your own power mattered as much as firepower and armor. The Ratel had proven that a wheeled infantry fighting vehicle could outperform tracked vehicles in that terrain. The Elan 90 had proven that a wheeled armored car with a 90mm gun could destroy Soviet T-34S and T-54S and chase Cuban armored columns across the Angolan lowveld. But by the mid-1980s, both vehicles were approaching the limits of what they could do against the latest Soviet armor. The T-55 and T-62 that FAPLA was now deploying required more than what the Eland's gun could reliably deliver. The Eland had to stop completely to aim. Its fire control was the optics of a 1960s French police car. Its gun had been designed when the T-34 was still the main threat. South Africa needed something that could kill whatever the Soviets could deploy, at ranges beyond the effective response of whatever was being killed, and move away before any counterfire could be organized. The Rooikat development program, internally designated Project Genesis, began in the late 1970s with exactly that requirement. The specific lesson from Angola was written in the operational reports of the battles around Cuito Cuanavale in 1987 and 1988. The Ratel 90, which mounted the same 90mm gun as the Eland on a larger 6-wheeled hull, had performed well against T-54S and T-55S when the engagements happened at close range in thick bush where flanking shots were possible. It had performed less well when forced to engage T-55S frontally at longer ranges in more open terrain, where the 90mm heat rounds penetration against the T-55's frontal armor was marginal, and the Ratel's inability to fire accurately while moving meant that every firing position was a stationary target. FAPLA was learning. Soviet advisors were watching. The next generation of armored vehicle that South Africa would field could not share the Ratel's limitations. It needed to kill at longer range. It needed to kill while moving. It needed a gun and a fire control system that gave it first-shot lethality at 2,000 meters, rather than the 200-meter close-range engagements that the Ratel crews had perfected out of necessity. Project Genesis was the program to build that vehicle. The arms embargo complicated everything, as it had with every South African weapons program since 1977. The stabilized fire control system that would define the Rooikat's tactical advantage over everything that had come before it could not be purchased from any NATO supplier. The turret drives, the ammunition, the night vision systems, the ballistic computer. All of it had to be designed and manufactured domestically by the same industrial base that had produced the Caspier and the Ratel and the G6 Rhino. Armscor and Denel built the vehicle. The gun was the GT4, a 7.6mm high-velocity automatic cannon developed entirely in South Africa, firing a range of ammunition, including armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot rounds at a muzzle velocity of approximately 1,200 meters per second. At that velocity, the penetrator arrives at the target faster than most fire control systems can complete their response cycle. The figure that matters most is the one that defines the Rooikat's entire tactical concept. At 2,000 meters range, the GT4 APFSDS round will defeat the side armor of a T-72 main battle tank. From the front, the geometry is more demanding. From the side or rear, The Rooikat's gun is lethal at any tactical range. The vehicle was designed to never present a Russian tank with a front aspect shot. It was designed to be somewhere else before that shot became necessary. The vehicle that emerged from the development program entered South African service in 1990. It weighed 28 tons in combat configuration. The hull was welded steel with a frontal arc sufficient to defeat two 3mm cannon fire and shell fragments, but not designed to stop main battle tank rounds. The Rooikat's protection was never intended to be its primary survival mechanism. Speed was. The engine was a turbocharged diesel producing 563 horsepower, driving 8 wheels through a fully automatic transmission, giving a top road speed of 120 kilometers per hour. That number requires context. A T-72 main battle tank has a maximum road speed of approximately 60 kilometers per hour, and its operational speed across country is considerably lower than that. A T-80, the most capable Soviet tank, reaches 70 kilometers per hour on road and substantially less across terrain. The Rooikat at 120 kilometers per hour on road can move between firing positions faster than any Russian main battle tank can change its targeting solution. Off-road, across the terrain types that define the Southern African operational environment and that define significant portions of the Ukrainian operational environment, the 8-wheeled platform demonstrated a consistent advantage over tracked vehicles in terms of sustained cross-country speed, fuel consumption, and mechanical reliability. Operational range without refueling was 700 kilometers. A Rooikat could leave its base, engage targets 300 kilometers away, and return without requiring a logistic stop that would create a vulnerable signature on the battlefield. The fire control system is the component that separates the Rooikat from every earlier South African wheeled combat vehicle. The Eland 90 had to stop to fire accurately. The Ratel 90 had to stop to fire accurately. The doctrine built around those vehicles assumed that engagements would happen in covered terrain, at ranges below 1,000 meters, where the ability to halt briefly was not a critical tactical disadvantage. The Rooikat changed all of that. Its fully stabilized gun and sight system, developed domestically by Eloptro and integrated by Denel, allows the vehicle to engage targets accurately at full road speed. The commander can identify and designate a target while the vehicle is moving. The gunner's stabilized sight maintains lock on the target regardless of vehicle movement. The ballistic computer accounts for vehicle motion, target motion, range, temperature, and barrel wear in real time. The gun fires, the round hits, the vehicle is already accelerating toward its next position. This sequence, which the Rooikat can complete in the time it takes a T-72 crew to complete their targeting cycle, defines the tactical reality that Russian armored doctrine has no prepared answer for in Ukraine. Not because the Rooikat is in Ukraine. It is not. But because the vehicles that are in Ukraine, the wheeled tank destroyers and infantry fighting vehicles that France and Sweden and other NATO members have provided, operate on the same principle that the Rooikat proved 3 decades ago in South Africa. Identify from range, fire accurately while moving, relocate before the counter-fire cycle completes. Do not let the enemy complete the targeting solution. The Soviet doctrine that defined Russian armored doctrine for decades was built around a different assumption. Soviet wheeled armored vehicles, the BRDM series and the BTR family, were designed to screen and support tracked main battle tanks, not to fight them. The BRDM-2, the Soviet-wheeled reconnaissance vehicle, carried a 14.5mm heavy machine gun capable of defeating infantry and light vehicles. Against another armored vehicle with a serious gun, the BRDM had nothing. The Soviet assumption was that wheeled vehicles were inherently outmatched by tracked vehicles in direct combat, and should therefore avoid direct combat. The Ratel had already contradicted this in Angola. The Rooikat made the contradiction structural. A wheeled armored car with a proper anti-armor gun and a stabilized fire control system and a top speed of 120 kilometers per hour is not outmatched by a T-72. It is a different tactical problem. The T-72 is built to fight a symmetric opponent. The Rooikat was built to be an asymmetric one. Approximately 242 Rooikats were delivered to the South African National Defense Force across the production run that ended in the mid-1990s. The development program had run through multiple prototype iterations across 15 years, each generation refining the fire control integration, the hull geometry, and the ammunition types available to the GT4 gun. The Rooikat 76 that entered production service in 1990 was followed by continued development of the platform. Denel produced the Rooikat 105, a variant mounting a 105mm high-velocity gun capable of defeating the frontal armor of T-72 variants at ranges that exceeded typical combat engagement distances. The 105mm round's ballistic performance against modern Russian composite armor represents a meaningful capability increment over the original 7.6mm system.
Neither the Rooikat 76 nor the Rooikat 105 found export customers willing to commit to the platform. The procurement decisions that rejected it were made when the conventional wisdom still held that tracked armor was the only credible solution to the problem of fighting tracked armor. That conventional wisdom is now being revised, in real time, in the fields of eastern Ukraine. The vehicle entered service as the border war was ending. It did not see the combat in southern Angola, for which it had been conceptually developed, arriving just as the political settlement that ended both the border war and the apartheid state was concluding. The historical irony is precise. South Africa built the most capable wheeled tank killer in the world at exactly the moment when it no longer had a war to use it in. The Rooikat has deployed on United Nations peacekeeping missions in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It has been evaluated by foreign military delegations from nations that eventually chose other platforms. It remains in South African service today, refurbished and updated across multiple midlife improvement programs, its fire control systems upgraded, its communications modernized, its operational effectiveness substantially improved over the original 1990 production standard. South Africa's Denel developed a 105mm variant, the Rooikat 105, which increases the vehicle's armor penetration capability to levels that comfortably defeat the frontal armor of most Russian main battle tanks at typical engagement ranges. As of 2026, the Rooikat 105 has found no export customer. Every nation that evaluated it found reasons to choose a tracked alternative. The debate that is now being settled in real time on Ukrainian battlefields was not a debate those procurement decisions were willing to have.
In February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine with the most modern tracked armor it possessed. The T-72B3 and T-80 were the most capable production tanks in the Russian ground forces inventory. They were expected to advance rapidly against Ukrainian defenders who lacked the anti-armor capability to stop them. What Russian planners did not fully account for was the speed with which Ukraine's partners would supply wheeled anti-armor systems and the speed with which Ukrainian crews would demonstrate the tactical concept that wheeled mobility combined with accurate long-range fire was not merely viable against Russian armor, but in certain terrain conditions actively superior to it. The French AMX-10RC, a six-wheeled armored car carrying a 105mm gun with a stabilized fire control system, arrived in Ukraine in 2023. Ukrainian crews reported engaging and destroying T-72 tanks at ranges where the T-72 crew could not effectively respond. The vehicle moved after each engagement before the Russian counter-battery cycle could complete. The tactical sequence was identical to what the Rooikat had been designed to execute 30 years earlier and 10,000 kilometers away. The debate about whether wheeled anti-armor systems could survive and operate effectively against Russian main battle tanks was not a theoretical debate anymore. It was being answered in Zaporozhye and Kherson and Kharkiv, in fields where burning Russian tanks marked the positions that wheeled vehicles had visited and left before anyone could do anything about it. The Rooikat remains in South African service. Its intended replacement has not been contracted. The South African National Defense Force operates it in reduced but functional numbers. The vehicle's maintained at a serviceability rate that reflects genuine operational value rather than institutional inertia. The vehicle that the world's major armor manufacturers ignored in 1990 is not the vehicle they are ignoring today. France delivered Caesars and AMX-10RCs to Ukraine and watched the wheeled anti-armor concept validate itself against Russian armor in real time. Every nation that is now evaluating wheeled tank destroyers for its own force structure is evaluating a concept that South Africa proved under combat conditions in Angola before any of them were paying attention. There is a particular pattern in the history of South African military technology that repeats itself with enough consistency to be considered a principle rather than a coincidence. A country under comprehensive international sanctions, cut off from every conventional defense supplier, facing a real threat from real Soviet equipment on real terrain, builds the solution that everyone else said was impossible. The Caspier proved that a V-hull mine-protected vehicle could be built from commercial components and would outperform every purpose-built APC in the world at the specific task of surviving a buried anti-tank mine. The G6 Rhino proved that a 155mm gun could operate effectively from a wheeled platform at ranges that defeated Soviet counter-battery systems. The Rooikat proved that a wheeled armored car with proper fire control could kill Soviet main battle tanks at operational range while moving. In each case, the proof was dismissed, ignored, or not purchased by the militaries that would eventually need exactly the capability it represented. In each case, the capability proved itself again in a different war, in a different decade, against the same fundamental problem that South Africa had already solved. On a Ukrainian battlefield in 2024, a Russian tank commander searching for a vehicle that fired at him and vanished is not encountering something new. He is encountering something South Africa built 30 years ago, refined over a decade of development, and operated for 3 decades while the rest of the world was not paying attention. The Lynx strikes. The Lynx moves. The Lynx is already somewhere else.